In the 1940s and 1950s, a lecturer named Neville Goddard began teaching a method of prayer that directly contradicted how Christianity had been practiced for centuries. Not because it rejected religion, but because it redefined it. Neville didn't present prayer as asking God for help. He described it as a mental process based on assumption. In his 1952 book, The Power of Awareness, he pointed to a specific phrase repeated throughout the Bible, "I am that I am." Found in Exodus 3:14, this was traditionally interpreted as the name of God. But Neville argued it was not just a title, it was a principle. According to his interpretation, whatever follows "I am" becomes the state you enter psychologically. Not in a mystical sense, but through repeated identification. If a person constantly defines themselves through a certain condition, their perception, decisions, and behavior begin to align with it. This idea was not entirely new. In early Christian writings, especially before the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, there were multiple interpretations of divine identity and inner transformation. Some traditions emphasized internal change, others external authority. Over time, one interpretation became dominant. Prayer shifted from internal alignment to external request. Instead of assuming a state, people were taught to ask for change, and that difference is critical. Because from a behavioral perspective, what you assume about yourself influences how you act, and how you act determines what you experience over time. Neville's method was simple. Instead of asking for something to happen, you assume the state as if it already exists, not through repetition of words alone, but through mental imagery combined with emotional conviction. He insisted that the feeling of already being what you want is what reorganizes behavior. Modern neuroscience partially supports this mechanism. Research on mental rehearsal shows that the brain activates similar neural pathways when an experience is vividly imagined as when it is physically lived. Studies on neuroplasticity demonstrate that repeated mental states can influence perception, attention, and decision-making. In other words, what you repeatedly assume begins to shape how you see the world. Neville's approach removed the need for intermediaries. No priest, no ritual, no external authority. Only the individual and their own internal state, and that idea was controversial. Neville didn't just talk about theory, he described a specific method. In multiple lectures recorded between 1948 and 1965, he repeated the same instruction. The technique works only when the mind is in a relaxed, drowsy state, what he called the state akin to sleep. Today, this state is associated with what neuroscience defines as theta brainwave activity, typically between 4 and 8 Hertz, which appears naturally in the transition between waking and sleep. In this state, the brain becomes less critical and more receptive to suggestion. This is important because under normal waking conditions, the mind constantly filters new information. It compares, rejects, doubts. But as you move towards sleep, that filter weakens. Neville's method was built around this window, not during full alertness, but during reduced resistance. Once in that state, he instructed people to construct a short mental scene that implies the result they want has already happened. Not imagining how it will happen, not focusing on the process, only the end. For example, instead of imagining getting a job, you imagine the moment after, hearing someone congratulate you, feeling the relief, noticing small details that signal completion. He emphasized something very specific. The scene must feel real, not visually perfect, but emotionally convincing. Because emotion, not words, is what anchors the experience in memory. Modern research supports this distinction. Studies in cognitive science show that emotionally charged experiences create stronger neural encoding than neutral ones. This means the brain is more likely to treat those experiences as relevant, even if they are internally generated. In simple terms, if you repeatedly enter a state and feel it as real, your brain begins to treat it as familiar. And what feels familiar starts to guide behavior. This is where Neville's idea becomes practical. If someone repeatedly assumes a state of confidence, for example, they are more likely to act in ways consistent with that state, not because reality magically changes, but because perception and decision-making shift. Opportunities are noticed differently, Risks are evaluated differently. Actions become aligned with the assumed identity. Over time, this creates real-world consequences, not instantly, but consistently. Neville insisted on one more detail: repetition. He called it living in the end, returning to the same assumed state night after night until it feels natural. Not forced, not artificial, but normal. Because once something feels normal, it no longer requires effort. And when behavior changes without effort, results follow. Neville's ideas didn't appear in a vacuum. They were part of a broader movement often called New Thought, which developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This movement emphasized the role of the mind in shaping experience, drawing from a mix of Christian interpretation, philosophy, and early psychology. By the time Neville began teaching in the 1940s, these ideas were already circulating, but not widely accepted, because they conflicted with established doctrine. In traditional Christianity, especially after the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD and the formation of later theological structures, the relationship between the individual and the divine became more defined. Authority was centralized, interpretation was standardized, and practices like prayer were framed within that structure. Neville's interpretation moved in the opposite direction. He suggested that the creative process described in Scripture operates through individual consciousness, not as a replacement for religion, but as a reinterpretation of how transformation actually happens. This is where the tension appeared, because once you shift the focus from external authority to internal process, the entire framework changes, not politically, but psychologically. Religious institutions did not erase Neville in the literal sense. He was not banned globally, and his books were published, distributed, and still exist today. But his ideas were largely rejected within mainstream theology. He was often labeled as metaphysical, speculative, or outside orthodox teaching. And that matters, because it explains why his work remained on the edges rather than in the center. Not because it was hidden, but because it didn't fit. At the same time, his audience continued to grow. Lectures in New York and Los Angeles attracted people interested in practical methods, not doctrine. Individuals who were less concerned with belief systems and more focused on results. This created a different kind of following, not institutional, but personal. People applied the method in their own way. Some reported changes in behavior, decision-making, and life direction. Others saw no results at all, and that distinction is important, because Neville's technique is not universally accepted as a law in the scientific sense. It does not guarantee outcomes in the way it is sometimes presented online today. What it does offer is a structured way to influence internal state. An internal state does influence behavior. This is where the real value is, not in claims of instant transformation, but in consistent change over time. If you remove the language, the debates, and the interpretations, what remains is a simple process. You change the state, and the behavior follows. Neville's method was built on that sequence, not forcing results, not waiting for external change, but repeatedly entering a state until it becomes familiar enough to influence how you think, decide, and act. And that's where most people fail, not because the method is complicated, but because they expect immediate results. They try it once, maybe twice, without changing how they actually behave during the day. But the method was never about a single moment. It was about consistency, entering the same state repeatedly until it stops feeling like imagination and starts feeling like identity. This is why Neville emphasized the period before sleep, because it's one of the few moments when the mind is naturally less resistant, not completely passive, but less critical. If you use that moment intentionally, you reduce friction. The process itself is simple. At the end of the day, when you are relaxed but still aware, you bring to mind a short scene that implies a result you want has already happened. Not how it happens, not when, just the end. You repeat it, not mechanically, but with attention. You focus on how it would feel if it were already true. Not exaggerated emotion, but a quiet sense of familiarity. Then you stop. No forcing, no overthinking. and you return to it the next day. Over time, this creates a shift, not in reality directly, but in how you engage with it. You notice different things. You respond differently, you make different decisions, and those decisions produce different outcomes. That's the part that is often ignored. The method does not replace action, it reshapes it. Because once your internal state changes, your external behavior follows without effort. And when behavior changes consistently, results are no longer random. They become predictable. You don't need to believe in it as a theory. You only need to test it as a process. Because at the end of the day, everything you experience is filtered through the state you enter it with. And that state can be trained. If you'd like to support this work, you can do so by becoming a member. Support is never expected, but always deeply appreciated. Thank you for being part of this journey.